The check fluttered to the floor like a dead leaf. $10 million. White paper, blue ink, a neat signature at the bottom, and the sound it made when it landed, soft, almost polite, felt louder than any shout. For half a second, the bank lobby froze. Then the silence broke. "That is not acceptable," the bank manager said, her voice clipped, sharp, rehearsed. "You can't just walk in here with this." She didn't say fake. She didn't have to. The man standing across from her didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't protest. Didn't reach for the check on the marble floor. He simply looked at her, calm, steady, unflinching. His name was Daniel Carter. Mid-40s, clean-shaven, dark charcoal coat that had seen a few winters but still held its shape. Shoes polished, not flashy, just cared for. His posture carried quiet discipline, the kind that came from years of choosing restraint over reaction. Around them, the downtown bank hummed with low, judgmental energy. A few customers pretended not to stare. A few didn't pretend at all. Daniel felt it, the familiar tightening in his chest. "Here we go again, sir," the manager continued, already waving toward the security desk. "This branch handles high-value transactions. If you're trying to cash a check of this size, there are procedures, appointments, verifications, and frankly," she paused. Her eyes flicked down to his coat, his hands, his face. "We need to ensure legitimacy." "Legitimacy." Daniel inhaled. Slowly, "I scheduled an appointment," he said, voice even. 3 days ago, under my name." The manager blinked, annoyed. She tapped rapidly on her keyboard, nails clicking like a countdown. "I don't see it," she said. "And even if you did," she glanced again at the amount, $10 million doesn't just appear. A couple waiting behind him exchanged looks. One man chuckled under his breath. Daniel heard it. He always did. He had grown up hearing laughter like that. At 12, when a store clerk followed him through every aisle. At 19, when a professor double-checked his exam for mistakes. At 30, when a boardroom went silent the moment he spoke, then nodded when someone else repeated his idea. Silence had a sound, and right now, it was loud. "Ma'am," Daniel said gently, "that check is drawn from a verified corporate account. You can call the issuing bank. The reference number is on the back." The manager didn't look. Instead, she reached down, picked up the check between 2 fingers like it might stain her, and ripped it cleanly, and half gasps rippled through the lobby. The sound of tearing paper sliced through the air. "There," she said, "problem solved." Daniel's heart skipped, not in anger, but in disbelief. She actually did it, for the first time. His composure wavered, not outwardly, but inside. $10 million, destroyed, without a word. "Are you serious?" Someone whispered. Security shifted closer. The manager straightened her blazer, clearly satisfied. "Sir, you need to leave, now." Daniel looked at the 2 halves of the check lying on the counter. Then he looked back at her. "You just destroyed a negotiable instrument," he said quietly. "Belonging to my company," she laughed, not loudly. "Just enough. Your company?" she echoed. "I don't think so." That was when it happened. Not a shout, not a threat, not a scene, just a sentence, delivered calmly. "I'd like to speak." "With your regional director," Daniel said immediately. The manager's smile tightened. "Our director is very busy. And frankly, sir, you're already disrupting." Her words died mid-sentence, because her phone vibrated. She glanced down. Once. Twice. Her expression changed. Across the lobby, a young teller stared openly now. Security stopped advancing. The manager answered the call, her voice suddenly soft, professional, controlled. "Yes, Mr. Henderson? Yes, he's here. Yes, right in front of me." She listened. Her face drained of color. "Yes," she said again. "Of course." She lowered the phone, looked at Daniel. Swallowed. Then hesitated. For the first time since he walked in, she didn't know what to say. "Sir?" she said finally, her voice thinner now. "Please, have a seat." Daniel didn't move. "I'll stand," he replied. Around them, the lobby leaned in, every ear, every eye, because something had shifted. The power in the room no longer belonged where it had seconds ago, and no one yet understood why. The chair remained empty. Daniel stood exactly where he was, hands loosely clasped in front of him, eyes calm but alert. He could feel the shift in the room like a pressure change before a storm. Conversations that had been murmurs faded into silence. Even the soft jazz playing through the ceiling speakers seemed suddenly inappropriate. The bank manager, Linda Avery, according to the brass nameplate on her desk, cleared her throat. "Please," she said again, this time forcing a smile. "This will just take a moment." Daniel nodded once. Not in agreement. Just acknowledgement. She gestured sharply to a glass-walled conference room off to the side. "We'll speak privately." Privately, Daniel thought. Now you want privacy. He followed her without resistance. Inside the room, the temperature felt colder. Linda closed the door and turned immediately defensive, folding her arms like armor. "I don't appreciate being blindsided," she said. "If you're trying to intimidate my staff by calling executives—" "I didn't call anyone," Daniel replied. That stopped her. "What?" "I didn't call," he repeated. "Your director called you." She narrowed her eyes. "That doesn't make sense." "It will," Daniel said quietly. For a moment, neither spoke. Linda's confidence wavered, then hardened again. She straightened, as if reminding herself who she was in this space. "Let's be clear," she said. "You walked into my branch with a $10 million check, no visible assets, no known relationship with this bank, and expected red carpet treatment." Daniel tilted his head slightly. "I expected professional treatment," she scoffed. "Professional doesn't mean blind trust." "Professional," he said evenly, "means verification before destruction." Her jaw tightened. That check could have been fraudulent. "You didn't check." "You don't understand the risk I manage every day. You didn't check." Daniel repeated. The silence that followed was sharp outside the glass walls. The lobby had turned into a quiet theater. Customers lingered longer than necessary. A woman pretended to fill out a deposit slip she'd already completed. A man leaned casually against a column. Phone raised just enough to record, though he wasn't sure why yet. Security stood still, unsure. Linda noticed. Her voice dropped. "You're causing a scene." "I'm standing," Daniel said. "You're escalating." Her nostrils flared. "You think this is about race?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. He looked at her not accusingly, not angrily. "Just honestly, I think," he said, "that if I looked different, you would have checked the system before you tore that check." Linda laughed again, louder. This time, "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" She waved her hand dismissively. "I've worked in banking for 20 years. I've seen every scam in the book." "Then you know," Daniel replied, "that scammers rush. They bluff, they get loud." He leaned forward slightly. "They don't ask for verification." Linda opened her mouth. Her phone buzzed again. She froze. The caller ID made her swallow. "Hard, Henderson Regional DR Recto." She glanced at Daniel. He gave no reaction. She answered. "Yes, Mr. Henderson." A pause. Her face tightened. "Yes." "I understand. Yes, he's with me now." Another pause. "Yes." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Right away." She ended the call slowly. For the first time, she didn't speak. Daniel waited. "Finally," she said, "he wants a full report." "Of course," Daniel said. He asked why a guest with a verified appointment was denied service. Daniel said nothing. "And," Linda added, her voice brittle, "why a check was destroyed without authorization." There it was, the word authorization. Linda's shoulders slumped just a fraction. "I was protecting the branch," she said, more to herself than to him. Daniel met her eyes. "You were protecting your assumptions." Her lips pressed together. They exited the conference room. The lobby snapped to attention. Linda forced a professional smile. "Too wide, too late." "There's been a misunderstanding," she announced. "We're resolving it." A man near the door muttered, "Looks like it." Daniel heard that too. Linda turned sharply. "Sir, I'll need you to fill out an incident form." "For the destruction of my property?" Daniel asked. "Yes," she snapped, then softened. "Standard procedure." "Good," Daniel said. "I'll need a copy." Her eyebrow twitched. She printed forms. Whispers grew. "That's a $10 million check." She ripped it. "Who does that?" "Did you hear the call?" A young teller barely out of training stared at Daniel with something like awe. Linda noticed and shot her a look. Back to work. The teller flinched. Daniel felt a familiar ache in his chest. It's never just about one person, he thought. It's about who gets corrected and who gets protected. Linda slid the papers across the counter. Fill these out. Daniel picked up a pen. His handwriting was neat. Precise. Name. Company. Contact. Linda leaned forward slightly. Peering at the company name, her eyes narrowed. She read it again, then once more, her fingers stilled on the counter. That's not right, she said slowly. Daniel continued writing. That company, she said, is a holding firm. Yes, with international subsidiaries. Yes, she swallowed. You're saying you represent— I didn't say that, Daniel replied. The form did. Her pulse visibly jumped. She turned to her computer, typing furiously. Her screen reflected in her glasses. Then she stopped. Her mouth went dry. The lobby was silent again. Linda looked up at Daniel, her voice barely audible. This says, you're listed as— Before she could finish, another voice cut through the room. Clear, male, authoritative. Daniel Carter? Heads turned. A man in a tailored navy suit had just stepped through the revolving door, silver hair. Calm presence. Executive posture. Linda recognized him instantly. Her face went pale. That, whispered the man with the phone, is the regional director. The director's eyes found Daniel. He smiled and took a step forward. Sir, he said respectfully. Extending his hand, Linda's breath caught, because no one had ever called this man sir in her branch before, and she was about to find out why. The word sir didn't echo. It settled. It landed on the marble floor, slipped into every quiet corner of the bank, and changed the temperature of the room without making a sound. Daniel accepted the handshake. Not quickly, not slowly, just normally. Good to see you, Michael, he said. Linda's eyes darted between them. Good to see you. They knew each other. Michael Henderson, the regional director, turned slightly, giving Daniel his full attention while still standing in the center of the lobby, where everyone could see. I apologize for the inconvenience, Michael said. I was notified there was an incident involving your appointment. Daniel nodded. There was. No accusation. No drama. Just truth. Linda forced herself forward. Mr. Henderson, I can explain. Michael raised one finger. Not sharply, calmly. Give me a moment, Linda. She stopped mid-sentence. Daniel noticed her hands were trembling. Michael gestured toward the counter. May I see what remains of the check? Linda hesitated, then reached behind the desk and pulled out the two torn halves, sliding them across the surface like evidence. Michael examined them carefully. $10 million. A corporate seal. A signature he recognized. His jaw tightened. Do you know what this is? He asked Linda. Yes, she said quickly. It appeared to be a check presented without proper verification. Michael looked up. Appeared, Linda nodded. Yes, Michael turned back to Daniel. Did you request verification? I did, Daniel replied, multiple times. And were you denied? Yes. Michael exhaled slowly. That breath carried years of restraint. Policy meetings, diversity memos, quiet warnings that never quite reached the people who needed them most. Michael turned back to Linda. Do you know, he asked evenly, how many times Mr. Carter has visited our branches nationwide? Linda shook her head. Do you know how many compliance audits he's passed without a single flag? Silence. Do you know, Michael continued, how many board meetings he sat in where our institution asked for his capital? Linda's lips parted. Michael didn't raise his voice. That was the worst part. He is not new here, Michael said. We are. Daniel felt it then. Not satisfaction, not revenge, something heavier. Memory. 20 years earlier, a different bank. Different lobby. His mother standing beside him, purse clutched tightly, as a teller spoke slowly, too slowly, explaining why her paycheck would take extra time to clear. Daniel had been 16. He remembered the way his mother's shoulders tensed, the way she nodded politely, the way she whispered in the car afterward, It's fine, baby. Don't make trouble. Daniel had learned something that day. Dignity wasn't loud. It was heavy, and you carried it whether people saw it or not. Back in the present, Linda's voice shook. Mr. Henderson, I was protecting the branch. Michael nodded once. I believe you thought you were. He turned to Daniel again. Would you like to step into my office upstairs? Daniel considered it. He glanced around the lobby. The teller who had flinched. At the customers who were now fully watching. At Linda standing behind her counter, small for the first time. No, Daniel said. I'm fine here. Linda swallowed hard. Michael didn't argue. Then let's address this here, he said. He turned to the lobby. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. No one moved? Michael lowered his voice just enough to be intimate and just loud enough to be heard. This institution prides itself on trust. That trust must go both ways. He looked directly at Linda. Linda, what is our protocol for high-value checks? She answered automatically. Verify issuing bank. Confirm reference number. Escalate to compliance if needed. And at what step? Michael asked. Do we destroy the check? Linda's throat worked. We don't, Michael nodded. Correct? The silence pressed in. Daniel felt a familiar sting behind. His eyes not because of the check, because of the assumption, the way it slid into place. So easily. He thought of all the times he had walked into rooms like this, banks, hotels, boardrooms already measured, already weighed. He thought of how often he'd been asked to prove himself twice and how exhausting it was to always be calm. Michael turned to Daniel. I owe you an apology. Daniel met his gaze. I accept. Simple. Honest. But Michael wasn't finished. I also need to ask you something, he said. Yes? Would you be willing to share what this felt like? Linda stiffened. Daniel. Notice. He paused not for effect but for truth. It felt familiar, he said finally. Linda's eyes flicked up. Familiar how? Michael asked. Daniel chose his words carefully. Like being invisible until I'm inconvenient, he said. And unbelievable until someone else confirms I exist. The room held its breath. Linda's face flushed. Michael nodded slowly. That, he said, is not acceptable. He turned to Linda. Linda, this incident will be reviewed. Fully, her shoulders sagged. I understand. And, Michael added, you will issue a written apology, Linda blinked. To the customer? Michael's eyes sharpened. To Mr. Carter, she nodded stiffly. Yes. Michael turned back to Daniel. There's something else you should know. Daniel raised an eyebrow slightly. The board has been discussing a new partnership, Michael said. One that hinges on trust. Daniel waited. They wanted to meet you, Michael continued. Quietly, before making any announcements. Linda's head snapped up. Meet him? Michael looked at Daniel. This visit was not just a transaction. Daniel understood. The weight in his chest shifted. Then, Daniel said, they've already learned something. Michael smiled faintly. They have. Linda stood frozen, the realization sinking in. This man, this calm, composed man she had dismissed, was not here to ask for permission. He was here to decide, and she had just shown him exactly what kind of institution he was dealing with. The apology didn't come right away. Linda stood behind the counter, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned pale. The lobby was still full, but no one spoke now. Even the air conditioning seemed louder, like it was trying to fill the space where words had failed. Michael glanced at his watch. Linda, he said calmly, I'll give you a moment. She nodded, stiff, and disappeared into the back office. The glass door closed. And for the first time since Daniel had walked in, the system began to move not in his favor, but around him. 2 compliance officers arrived within minutes. Clipboards. Tablets, neutral expressions trained to look objective while protecting the institution first. Mr. Carter, one of them said, a woman in her early 30s will need to document everything for internal review. Daniel nodded. Of course. We'll also need to temporarily freeze any related transactions until the investigation is complete. Michael turned sharply. That won't be necessary. The officer hesitated. Sir, protocol. Michael met her eyes. Protocol exists to prevent risk. Mr. Carter is the benchmark we measure risk against. The officer blinked. RECALIBRATING. Daniel watched this exchange carefully. This was the part people never saw. Not the insult. Not the tearing of paper, but the slow tightening of policy, Mr. Carter. The second officer said, adjusting his glasses. We may also need to review your company's recent transfers. Daniel smiled faintly. You already have? He said. The officer frowned. I'm not sure. Quarterly audits, Daniel continued. Voluntary transparency reports. Third-party verification. The officer's tablet chimed as new information populated. Oh, he said quietly. Michael exhaled. Daniel leaned back against the counter. Feeling the familiar isolation creep in, this was always the turning point, when authority realized its mistake, but couldn't admit it without protecting itself. So it slowed things down, wrapped accountability in paperwork. He thought of his father, a civil engineer who once told him, they won't block the door. They'll make the hallway so long you give up walking. Daniel had never forgotten that. From behind the glass. Linda watched. Her face was tight, pale, calculating when she finally returned. She held a printed letter she stopped 3 feet from. Daniel didn't meet his eyes. Mr. Carter, she said, reading stiffly, I apologize for my actions earlier today. They were inconsistent with our values and procedures. The words were technically correct, emotionally empty. Michael waited. Linda hesitated, then looked up. I made an assumption, she said quietly. Daniel met her gaze. Yes, he said. She swallowed. That assumption was wrong? The room stayed silent. Daniel nodded once. Thank you for saying it. He replied, not forgiveness, not absolution. Just acknowledgement. But the system wasn't done. A compliance officer cleared his throat. Mr. Carter, there's one more issue. Michael's jaw tightened. Go on. The destroyed check technically requires reissuance, which could take several business days. Daniel smiled slowly. Or, he said, it could be reissued immediately, electronically. The officer hesitated. That would require executive override. Michael didn't hesitate. You have it. Linda looked stunned. Daniel felt something unexpected, not relief, but sadness, because none of this speed existed before the respect arrived. As preparations began. The lobby buzzed again, but differently now. Not curiosity, reflection. A woman near the door whispered to her husband, imagine if no one important had walked in. A young man shook his head. He stayed calm the whole time. The teller watched Daniel like she was memorizing him, not as a symbol. As proof. Michael turned to Daniel. There's something else. Daniel raised an eyebrow. The board asked me to observe this branch personally today, Michael admitted. Unannounced. Linda stiffened. They were concerned, Michael continued, about patterns, complaints, subtle ones. He looked at Linda not accusingly, but firmly. Today, answered some questions. Linda's shoulders slumped. Daniel absorbed that. Quietly. So this wasn't random. This was a test, and she had failed it publicly. Mr. Carter, Michael said, lowering his voice, I want to be clear. Whatever decision you make next about, the partnership will be respected. Daniel nodded. I know. Michael studied him. Even after this? Daniel looked around the lobby. One last time. At the systems. At the people inside them. At the invisible weight so many carried without ever being believed. This, Daniel said softly, is exactly why the decision matters. Michael understood. Linda did too. And for the first time since the check was torn, the truth settled fully in the room. This wasn't just about a bank. It was about access. About who gets doubted, and about what happens when the person being underestimated refuses to disappear. But the real twist, the reason Daniel had chosen this branch. This day had not been spoken yet, and when it was, nothing in this building would feel the same again. The elevator doors closed with a soft, final sound. Daniel stood inside with Michael alone now, the quiet hum of ascent replacing the noise of the lobby below. Neither man spoke at first. Glass walls slid past them, floors of offices, muted conversations. People unaware that a decision with real weight was forming. Just a few feet above their heads, Michael broke the silence. You chose this branch, he said. Daniel nodded. Yes, why? Daniel looked straight ahead. Because this is where the complaints came from, Michael exhaled slowly. I suspected. The elevator slowed. Before the doors opened. Daniel spoke again. And because it's where the pilot program would begin, Michael turned to him sharply. You already knew, Daniel finally met his eyes. I helped design it. The doors opened into the executive floor. Quiet, carpeted, controlled. A long corridor led to a glass conference room at the end. Its walls tinted just enough to obscure the people inside. The board was waiting. Daniel could see silhouettes. 6 figures seated around a table. One empty chair. Michael stopped walking. Daniel, he said carefully, before we go in, I need to say this clearly. Daniel waited. What happened downstairs, Michael continued, was unacceptable. But I don't want you to feel pressured. I don't, Daniel replied. Michael nodded. Good. They walked. Inside the conference room. The air felt different. Not hostile. Evaluating. The chair at the head of the table remained empty. Daniel noticed that immediately. A woman in her 60s, sharp eyes, silver hair, stood as they entered. Mr. Carter, she said warmly. Thank you for coming. Daniel inclined his head. Thank you for having me. The others followed suit. No hesitation. No doubt Linda was not there. They took their seats. Michael remained standing. The woman Elaine Whitmore, chair of the board, folded her hands. We asked Michael to observe this branch today, she said. Quietly. Daniel nodded. I know. You also knew, she added, that we were deciding whether to expand the Equity Access Initiative. Daniel said nothing. Before we vote, Elaine continued, we needed to know something. She leaned forward slightly. Not about your finances or your firm, or your credentials. Daniel waited. We needed to know, she said, whether our systems would recognize you, without being told who you are. The room was silent. Michael spoke. They didn't, Elaine nodded. No, they didn't. One of the board members, a man in a dark suit, cleared his throat. Which brings us to the central question. He looked directly at Daniel. Why us? He asked. After today, why would you still consider partnering with this bank? Daniel didn't answer right away. He thought of the torn check, of Linda's certainty. Of the compliance freeze, of how fast everything changed once. His name carried weight. Then he spoke. Because walking away would be easier, Daniel said. And easier doesn't change systems. The board listened. I didn't come here to prove who I am, Daniel continued. I came to see who you are when no one is watching. Elaine nodded slowly. And you're conflicted, Daniel said, capable of progress, and still dangerous to people without power. No one interrupted. That's exactly why the initiative matters, he added, and why I needed to see this branch fail before I could help you rebuild it. Michael's eyes widened slightly. Elaine exchanged looks with the others. You're saying, she said carefully, that today wasn't an accident. Daniel shook his head. It was inevitable. Silence settled again, this time thoughtful. Heavy. Then Elaine gestured toward the empty chair at the head of the table. There's something you should know, she said. Daniel raised an eyebrow. That seat, she continued, was meant for you. Daniel didn't react. Not as a guest, she clarified. As an equal. Michael turned fully toward Daniel now. Elaine went on. The Equity Access Initiative requires more than funding. It requires authority. She slid a folder across the table. Daniel didn't open it yet. We want you, she said, as interim oversight chair. Full veto power over compliance, training, and branch leadership during the rollout. Michael felt the weight of that land. Daniel finally opened the folder. Inside, board documents, authorization letters, the title. Daniel closed the folder gently. Downstairs. Linda was still behind her counter, still thinking she had offended a customer, still unaware. She had torn up a check belonging not just to a man, but to the person who would now help decide her future. Daniel looked back at Elaine. One condition, he said. Elaine nodded. Name it. The first branch audited, Daniel said, is this one. Michael didn't breathe. Elaine smiled faintly. Agreed. Daniel stood. Then, he said, let's begin. And somewhere below, a system that had relied on quiet assumptions began to realize it had just been seen. The audit did not begin with announcements. No emails marked urgent. No press releases. No emergency meetings. It began with lists. Policies pulled from archives. Training manuals last updated years ago. Complaint logs tagged resolved without resolution. Daniel sat in a glass office overlooking the city, the same city that had taught him how to be calm in rooms that questioned his right to exist. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The system was finally listening. Linda was called in on a Thursday morning. Not to be fired. Not yet. She sat across from Daniel in a neutral conference room, no desk between them, no symbols of rank. Just two chairs, a table, a recorder. She looked smaller than before. "Thank you for coming," Daniel said. She nodded. "I didn't have a choice." "That's how most accountability begins," he replied. She flinched, then steadied herself. Daniel pressed a button on the recorder. "This is a review conversation, not a trial," she swallowed. "Okay, tell me," he said gently, "what you saw when I walked in." She opened her mouth, closed it. "I saw risk," she said finally. "A situation that could go wrong." Daniel nodded. "What kind of risk?" She hesitated. "Fraud." "Based on what?" Linda's eyes dropped. "I don't know," she admitted. "A feeling." Daniel leaned forward slightly. "Do you often manage $10 million checks based on feelings?" Her cheeks flushed. "No." "Then what was different?" "Silence. The kind that doesn't accuse but doesn't let you escape either. I thought," she said quietly, "that if it was real, someone else would have come." Daniel nodded once. That sentence landed harder than any insult. After the meeting, Linda was placed on administrative leave, not announced, not dramatized, documented. Training protocols were rewritten, mandatory verification steps locked behind software, not discretion, bias audits external, quarterly, uneditable, and something else. Something Daniel insisted on. The young teller was promoted, not because she had spoken up, but because she had noticed, because she had watched power shift, and learned from it instead of denying it. Daniel called her into his office. She sat stiffly, nervous. "I saw you watching," he said. She blinked. I wasn't. It's okay," he smiled faintly. "What did you learn?" She thought carefully. "That calm doesn't mean weak," she said. "And that rules matter more when people don't look like expectations." Daniel nodded. "Good," he said. "Remember that." The check was reissued electronically instantly. $10 million moved without ceremony, just numbers changing hands the way they always had for some people. Michael stood beside Daniel as the confirmation appeared. "All of this," Michael said quietly, "because of one assumption." Daniel shook his head. "No," he replied. "Because of 1,000 small ones? This just made them visible." Michael looked at him. "Do you ever get tired of being the proof?" Daniel thought of his mother, of that quiet car ride, of the weight she carried so he wouldn't have to. "Yes," he said honestly. Then he smiled just a little. "But I get more tired of nothing changing." Weeks later, the board voted unanimously. The Equity Access Initiative launched. Not with Daniel's face on the website, but with systems redesigned so faces mattered less. The branch downstairs changed. So did others, not perfectly, but measurably. On Daniel's last day at that office, he walked through the lobby one more time. No one stared. No one whispered. A security guard nodded respectfully, not because he was told to, but because he recognized him now. Daniel paused by the counter. The marble surface had been refinished. No cracks. No memory of torn paper, but Daniel remembered. He always would. And that was the point. As he stepped outside, his phone buzzed. A message from Elaine. "You did exactly what you said you would." Daniel typed back, "So did you." He slipped the phone into his pocket and walked into the city. Calm, dignified, unmoved. Not because the system had finally seen him, but because this time he had changed it.